Hello, everyone. Welcome to whatever episode number this is of The Ancient as Modern Again. I think it's episode 5. Fingers crossed I got that right. I'm back with my friend George. George, happy almost Friday.
Yeah, happy almost Friday. We're at the end of November, and it's your season, Scorpio season.
That's right. As a Scorpio rising, I welcome this change into this season. I am ready to go, as they say, subterranean, because digging deep is one of my love languages. But speaking of digging deep, I mean, you just brought this up before we hopped online. We have seen, well, the photos are looking crazy, but we have seen images of Three Eye Atlas. And it's giving the level of disappointment I think that parents felt in the early 90s when they would take their families to the mall to get those family photos. And the photos always came out looking like, both kids had the hair all, one person was staring over there, one person was staring over here. It's just giving what's actually going on. And I would just like to gather your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so the essentially NASA had shared that they were going to have a press conference for Three Eye Atlas, right? And I saw it, I was like, "Ooh, this is interesting. Finally, they're going to be coming out with some official pictures, images, explanations, right?" Because it was pretty sus at the time. There had no live feed of Three Eye Atlas when it literally was the closest to us to be able to get some good stuff. And yeah, if you go and Google the images, I don't even know if those images, it's just like one image I've been seeing that they shared. It's absolute shit. It looked like, we were joking, right? It looked like somebody took a picture with their iPhone 7 or something. And you can see on the internet, like there's a whole bunch of other people who have been sharing their photos, amateur photographers who do not need $70 million equipment to take better pictures of Three Eye Atlas. And so I think it's just highlighting the disconnection between a lot of these larger institutions and the people, right? How long can you hoodwink everybody into believing that, there isn't something more to this? And if you have to look at history, like during the 1950s and 60s, there are a lot of stories of people who were reporting like UFO stuff and then were shut down by the government, scientists, etc., right? And saying, oh, it's just, a weather balloon or something of the sort. To me, it feels like they're trying the same tactics, but I think a lot more people are highly aware of the amount of things that are being declassified now that prove that some of those people from the past were not crazy. They've already had government hearings about UAPs, and it's very interesting how they changed the term for UFOs to UAPs, right? Deliberate language shifts. And so, this is the thing. I think it is very important for us to ensure that we do get the truth, right? That we don't turn everything into it must be aliens, right? Because there can be explanations, simple explanations for things. But I think we're way beyond that point where now it's an issue of trust between the people and the government. And so even if they are corrupt, right, in whatever it is that they've been capturing, people don't believe it because there are experiences people are having all over the world that do not align with the narrative I think they're trying to push. And so I think this touches on some of the other stuff we were talking about in the past, where there is a shift right now where more and more people are looking to the past. There's a guy, his name, but there's somebody who's in Peru right now who's looking at all the ancient megaliths and the ancient stone structures. Last time we spoke about the opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum, right? I think they already are abbreviating it to GEM. And there's something there where like the past and the future are coming together. I think NASA, I personally feel that they have known stuff, more stuff than they've let out for a long time. There have been conversations about, we went to the moon, came back, and then never really did anything for decades. Why? That doesn't seem like it was technically impossible. I think it was more, there was stuff that maybe we couldn't do in public since, those decades. And yeah, the conversations, the shift in attention to other things just became the new normal and people forgot. But yeah, I think maybe I'll stop there, but that's just like the latest news that really caught my attention.
I mean, I think that between this and all, I mean, last episode, we told everyone to look up, right? And since then, it's been a week. and this episode will be released. We doing this renegade style. We're not polishing none of our podcasts, hitting remove background noise, and then we send it straight to the internet, right? So this will be released on November 20th, 2025, so that the record will show what day it is. And I think that since we last talked last week, which was, I think, like last Wednesday, last Thursday, it's not even been that long. So much feels different. Like, it's seeming like one day on Earth is giving 6 months. And I don't know if it's just me that's in this weird, like, quantum leap. And I know you and I have talked about this offline and like WhatsApp and things like that. But I think that NASA's pictures are supposedly from the Mars Renaissance Orbiter. I think that's what it's called. So it's coming from the orbit of Mars. And you would think from the orbit of Mars, it would get an even better picture because it's out there with the comet. And this is supposedly also from October. We are now in November. I bring up the time leaps and the time jumps because we know that 3i Atlas is not where it was in the sky, right? Went towards the sun and now, it's hanging out wherever it's hanging out now. And I just think that it's to your point about what is deceit and what is protection. Now, do I believe that all people can handle all news, all information? No. The same way it's like, do you explain everything to a 4-year-old? No, because a 4-year-old is not to belittle 4-year-olds. They're definitely intelligent, but some things they don't yet fully comprehend because they've not experienced them, or they don't fully understand them because they've not seen enough of it. And I think that when it comes to, let's just say, astronomical things, so things happening in the celestials that are supposed to be science, no mysticism, no woo-woo, no anything, that our world, our modern world has really done such a great disservice. And when I think of like, the Dogo people of what is now, I believe, modern day Mali and other individuals across the ancient world, right? Whether it's Maya people, whether it was Aztecs, whether it was ancient Egyptians, and I'm talking before Cleopatra Egyptians, Nubians from the Nile, whomever it might be, ancient Chinese scholars, people have looked to the heavens, collected information, and shared it with people who would like to know and like to see. And it just feels like in this modern day, there's so many, I guess, protections around what people share, when they share it, how they share it. You're sharing pictures from almost 3 months ago. Like you're like
Exactly.
okay, and you're having a press conference today about something that appeared in the sky in September.
The world moved
Okay,
on already.
cute. You know what I'm saying? It's like, amateur astronomers have already provided better pictures than what NASA is providing, have already offered better critique, better scientific breakdown of what's happening in the sky, the nitrogen gas coming off of the tail of the comet, whatever. Like, there are people giving us real time updates, some of whom are scientists or citizen scientists. And it's more intriguing, more captivating, more convincing than what this international, intergalactic, potentially scientific body has provided us. And it just kind of begs the question, because this is not a tinfoil hat podcast, which no disrespect to those people, soldier on, but it's like, what are they hiding and why? And so the weave here is, what is protection, what is prevention, and what is propaganda? And I think that it really begs the question of, in a world like the world we're living in, where you've got AI, deep fakes, you've got fake news every day being generated by AI, being generated by humans, being generated by their agents who are hallucinating while running AI queries, you have to kind of ask yourself, what does, I would call it, digital discernment look like? Because some people believe everything they read because they've been taught that all truth comes from books. And they've just extended that logic into the digital age. And they're like, well, everything on the internet is real. And everything from the news is true. And everything in a magazine must be vetted. And it's like, even back then when books were being written by the victors of history who were squashing people and colonizing left and right, even that's also not true. So I guess the real question is like, what are you going to do? Like, you're upset, you're mad at NASA, and rightfully so. but not mad at NASA per se, but like upset at this idea that things are being hidden from us that should be shared with us. Because at this point, if it's just a comment, there's nothing to worry about. Just share the information. But how are you practicing like this digital discernment? And like, what advice do you have for me, for other people who might be listening?
So I think that's a really good term to use because I think now I've come to a point where in the digital age where I assume everything to be false. And what do I mean by that? I assume every single data point to be false, but if you get enough data points around whatever it is you're inquiring about, then you can get closer to the truth. So I think we have been used to often getting our truth from single data sources, right? From a news channel, from a newspaper, etc. Some people were wise enough to be able to try and, collect more sources, but there were still political ideologies that might shape the multiple sources that they were tuning in from, right? So that's an inherent bias. I think with AI, what I've been using it to do is when I'm inquiring about something, I'll ask it to give me like 5 to 7 sources from multiple angles so that each of them, you have like the first two might be opposing sources, right? Based on their own credibility online. And then sometimes you can give me sources from different regions around the world. Because I think the more that we can get used to taking in multiple frames of reference, the better it'll be. Because like we kind of maybe this is due to Western environments where there has been a sort of attitude towards like there is one way, one source that is the truth, right? And you see this be a very big thing in Christian religion or ideologies too, right? When people argue over what did Jesus say when I am this, the way, the truth, and the life, etc., right? So I see that kind of in the way that we operate in the West. So at COVID, right? Like the scientists say, which scientists are we talking about here, right? Because it seemed like we were only going from like one scientist, Fauci at the time, and whoever he was in cahoots with, right? And now looking back, we saw just how much information was incorrect, right? But the damage has been done. So digital discernment, I think, is about leveraging the tools and technologies in the digital space to train us to expand our own cognition to be able to fathom or deal with multiple angles of truth. I think we are coming out of a single source of truth mentality and expanding our field of vision and understanding to be able to handle like a fractal of angles of views around truth. Because there was a really cool video I saw on Instagram where, or maybe it was Twitter, but this guy was literally saying, he like shows a spiral, right? From the top. And it's like, this is truth. And then he collapses it in 3D and shows just a single line. This is also truth. Then he puts it at a quarter angle, right, in 3D space. This is also truth. And so a lot of people are often arguing over those different perspectives of truth, thinking that their perspective is the truth. And so by design, we are already biased. We will always be biased. We never have the whole truth. And that's the benefit of engaging with sort of the fragmented pieces that is humanity, right? So together we can get closer, but alone, I think there's very rarely one person who has the whole truth. And that means then when we're dealing with different sources, even if it seems ridiculous or untrue or fictitious, it's treated as a data source, as a data point, because underneath that, right, you can use technology to find an underlying truth. Because even within our mythologies, our fantasies, there's always elements of truth there too. And this taps into the ancient part of us who I think we were trained in symbolism and riddles and parables, right, to learn how to discern truth beyond just what we sense with our five senses.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder that there are also people who are actively trying to teach their populations how to identify the truth, right? So, a great example of this, and you can read the article in The Guardian, the New York Times, about Finland and how Finland is teaching their youth how to spot misinformation. But it's not just like misinformation that they might read in a magazine, right? It's comprehensive. They're trying to teach them how to spot misinformation in mathematics, in art, and in history, and in foreign language. And I think that that's really important because it speaks to what you're saying, right? They're using a collective methodology here. It's curricula. Like it's in the schools. They're not saying, hey, you as an independent parent or a grandparent or an auntie or an uncle or an elder cousin, like you're not the only one in charge of providing more information to your young person about how to discern. But I think that, it begs the question too, how do you get this information? I was having this conversation with someone recently, and they were just kind of like, "What do you think about this?" Insert hot button topic here, which I'm not going to bring up on this chat, but maybe another one. And I was like, well, this is how I feel about it. And I, went through a rundown of our nation, another nation, foreign involvement, and I was like, it's a complicated thing. But at the end of the day, I have this information because I've traveled to some of these countries. I've talked to some of the people who've lived through these experiences. I am also an American and I've been educated in the school system, public school educated, right? But I also went to school to study people, to study how people are indoctrinated, how people are cultivated, how people are educated. And so I have a lot of tools in my arsenal that if I were just a layperson, honestly, anywhere, struggling to make ends meet, trying to just make it to the next day, I don't know if I would have the ability to spot misinformation. And it really reminds me of, like, you're saying the spiral, that different angles. Is it a straight line? Is it this? I always say that I think that the truth is a ball. Everyone wants the truth to be a square that lands on one flat side, and it is what it is, and it stays. I think it rolls around. And I think as it rolls down the road, you begin to see different elements of that thing that I think identify as the truth. And, that's why when people say, well, my truth, I appreciate that because that is recognition that your lens is coloring your vantage point and your sight, right? But it just kind of, it's like, well, then what's the answer if it's supposed to be solved in collective? But there are those of us who wish to remain in the dark, or those of us who refuse to acknowledge another vantage point, who will tell, there are people out there, I hope I'm not one of them, but you'll say something to them, they'll be like, well, that's not true. But you're saying, like, I crossed the street, it was raining, I got wet. That's not true. The sky spit on you. Okay, well, it's my experience of something that happened to me as I was living through the world, right? And so I just kind of, it makes me curious about some of the other things we've talked about. We've talked a lot about frequency. We've talked a lot about, just kind of reverb, of how you can actually sit in a metaphysical space of alignment with where you are. And so then my next question becomes, do you think that we'll become a divided world? Those who hear the frequency, right? Those who hear kind of like the call, not that we're not already a divided world, and those who refuse to even acknowledge that there is something even going on.
Yeah, good question. And I think we've been living in that sort of world for a while now. I think it's just becoming more pronounced now. And I think somebody gave a really good analogy of this. Like when you look at crystals or the crystallization of water, if we look at where we're at in human history right now, I think we're like fragmented pieces, something shifted, and we're in that phase where things are crystallizing, they're solidifying, right? And this is a process that can cycle in and out. And I was listening to this talk. I don't know if we talked about it last time, but it was between a woman and another guy who looked around my age, Hawaiian, who was trained in the ancient Mu protocols, right? So for any of those who've never heard of Mu or the mythical land of Mu, it was apparently some large continent that existed in the Pacific somewhere. Some say that's why the Pacific Ocean is so large now because the land was there and then something happened and it just split apart, similar to the stories of Atlantis. But this guy is was trained by his Hawaiian elders, and he gave a really interesting view or perspective on Three Eye Atlas. And he said, Three Eye Atlas, if you actually look at it as a plasmic being emissary type vessel, right? He said he started giving these stories about ancient Mu and how there were these plasmic beings who actually had experimented with Mars and Venus and then Earth, talking about why we say that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And he said that if you assume that our world was electrical and we know things about, the opposite nodes required for even magnets, right? The polar opposites, then in the story that he was sharing, from his one elders, these beings had passed through Mars first, which, as we know, has much more of a masculine energy, and they were experimenting with creating life. They considered Mars a failed experiment because perhaps it went too much on the masculine, right? Then they went to Venus and they experienced the same thing, where maybe it was too much on the feminine. And then finally they came to Earth because they realized we need both of those energies to actually create sustainable life. And as we know from a lot of our mythologies, there have been countless times where humanity has had a restart, a wipeout event. But he was saying that with 3i Atlas coming in again, he says it comes at a time where we have hit a point in our evolution where we don't have to repeat the same cycle thing, right? And he said that actually the trajectory of 3i Atlas is if it goes towards Jupiter, that means we are good, we're in the clear. We've chosen better as a collective. If it goes towards Saturn, then that means we're going to have that big cataclysm that happens every 12,000 years and we will restart again. So his eyes are on the trajectory of 3i Atlas. And it's like every day right now, we're essentially choosing which path we're going on. And you hear again in different circles, everybody has different interpretations, but this was probably the most unique interpretation that I heard. Because again, he was talking about an assumption of the universe being electric. And if you do assume that it is electrical, then you can start to actually apply a lot of engineering, physics terminologies around electricity in general to what's going on with 3i Atlas. And then also, if you look at sound and light frequencies, it also starts to be able to be explainable through mathematics. And there's that article that I wrote called Tuning the Spheres, and I'll share that in the notes for after, where I was applying essentially music theory to 3i Atlas's current presence in our solar system, right? And like, if we treated every planet as like an instrument in an orchestra, the sun being kind of like the percussion, right? And how everything can potentially get shifted. But this, I think this explanation that he shared was super fascinating to me because it's looking at what's going on right now as his kind of like his one big test. And in terms of the vision, right? So I think we have been fragmented for a while. Everybody trying to find their place. We are in a crystallization period, right? And everybody's kind of choosing their path right now in this crystallization period. And it's super fascinating because if you use that same sort of analogy, there have been reports. If you go to Twitter, actually, it's really super fascinating. This month, there's been an increase in reports of there being a white sun. People are feeling or seeing, right, that there's been a shift in the sun. It's more white. And what does that usually mean? It means that whatever was around our planet, the veil is much thinner now that we can receive because the sun is actually white, I believe. But the reason why we were picking up on it as being, yellow, golden, etc., is because there's essentially there was a layer, right? Because if you go back to physics class, right, when you have light, prism, then you get our 7 colors from the rainbow, right? And so that means there was some sort of prism that was there that has either been removed or has been thinned, and we're now receiving direct light. Now, this is a theory, yeah, but it does then make me think, okay, so that crystal or prism that was in the middle, if that's being removed and we're recrystallizing, it's like we're recrystallizing is perhaps something that is being created from us in our choices right now, which is why it's so important that we do the work right now on this shadow stuff that we've been talking about, because it's not just emotional, spiritual, right? This is having like very real effects, I think, on the way that we're receiving physical light. And I've also been tracking in the tech space. I've been seeing more and more discoveries coming out of photonics. So for those who are not familiar, photons are found in light. Essentially, everything that we've seen in all the sci-fi films and space, the lightsaber from Star Wars, all that sort of technology is going to start to come because it's a representation of us mastering light that will be able to start using that in technology. Elon Musk said, "Oh, the sun is a sentient being. The sun is actually going to be our biggest power source in the future." And I would agree. If you look at the size of it, we would have no dent in the sun's power if we needed to get all the power that we need. And so these are all things, again, tracking some across different disciplines. But you see in the metaphysical space, people talking about it, raising consciousness, whatever. But then in the tech space, the scientific space, there's actually an increased number of discoveries around photonics and more startups also being built around photonic tech. So those are just a few of my insights. Hopefully that all came together in terms of the division and recrystallization aspect. But that's my view on that.
I mean, I guess the question becomes, the mirrors are here. You and I talk about this all the time. Things are being reflected, whether it's in the ancient stories, whether it's in the ancient songs, whether it's in mysticism and occult networks, whether it's, once again, in technology and science and research. And it really I'm of two minds. So one mind is we have an obsession with control. Just leave that there, let it land. And our obsession with control, when I say we, I mean humans. And when I say control, I mean manipulation and wielding of things at will. And when I think of the light, especially the light of the sun, I think of it as a blessing and a gift. But you stay out too long, you get burnt, you peel, you're in pain. It can be a curse.
Did that happen
But
for us? That doesn't happen with you.
it happens to me. I
Oh my
burn and
God,
I
really?
peel. I
What?
know. It's terrible. I'm telling you, like full blown peeling, full blown
Wow.
burns, full blown pain. It's awful.
Got some
I'm like,
European
as
ancestry in there,
brown
maybe?
as I am, I'm like, as much melanin as I have, which praise be, I'm like, what kind of evolutionary mix up was this? It's like I'm here because I can't get burned, right? But and alas, here I am burning. But I say that, to say, what's the point? Like, not to be dismissive of really cool research, but like, as cute as the lightsabers really are, especially the double sabers, wow, 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 cute. But why? Like, I don't know. It's like, is it so we can harness energy so that we can have renewable resources that don't strain the earth because of extractive practices, especially around fossil fuels? If you said that that was why, I'd be like, yeah, great, but we could have done that 50 years ago. So it just begs the question, well, what's this all really about,
Nope. Exactly. And I think, there is also there was another guy that I was listening to. I forgot his name. It's like George Castle. Well, it's like a Greek last name, but he also gave like an interesting take on how energy sources, how they can be corrupted and how it impacts everything else we create on top of corrupt energy sources. And he was giving the example of like, when we have flickering of electricity and, we notice that the lights might flicker or whatnot. He was talking about like dirty versus clean power. And he says that the way that we have extracted power in general is very exploitative, right? It's something that we don't ask for permission for. We just go ahead and do. They're just talking about power sources in general, corrupt versus clean. And I think for any empire that's always looking to expand and colonize, there's always going to be an extraction sort of energy towards that. We are going to mine resources to extract and then use for whatever purpose we have. But this is why, again, the ancient as mod pod, right? We're looking at like ancient practices versus modern. And there's something about the ancient practices where it's all about asking for permission, consent, being grateful, respectful, those are things. Because I think research is finding that that sort of energy does impact how things interact with our bodies. Right? There was that famous research by the Japanese scientist who crystallized water because he was able to prove that actually the words that we give to water will change the crystallization flow. And so we already have the research there, but we still don't really apply it at large, right, in terms of common knowledge. And I think for the sun, of course, the reason why people are looking at the sun as a power source is because of the power need for AI infrastructure right now, right? That's to me what I'm seeing as the most crucial need for that. So just like during the time when people expanded out from their local town or village to find all these new unconquered lands that they needed to tame, right? The Wild West, etc. These sort of frontiers always look like that, and it always looks like this is an unlimited new power source or place for power. I don't know if we'll ever get rid of that, but I think there is a way for us to just freaking learn from our past because I love tech, but I do understand that the money for tech and creation of these things have come from questionable places through questionable circumstances. Every new tech innovation always starts out as something sort of noble, and then it ends. If it's truly advanced, what does it get used for first? Military, right? Defense, right? A weapon. And I think that's probably, if we don't learn from our past, that's probably what the sun will be used for as well. If we look at Star Wars, the Death Star, right, harnessing black holes and that sort of energy to destroy planets, galaxies, universes, right? And so for people who want or seek control, it's very clear that that's what they need to use it for. For those who do not see that, I hope there are ways to balance the force, if you want to use those terms, right? Because I do feel that for every person that seeks control, there is a greater power that can reharmonize, right? And just kind of teach those same people a lesson of what true power is and where it comes from. Because
I think that that was eloquently put because you can, who can defeat the sun? I just sometimes when I hear these things, I'm just kind of like, we're going to go conquer Mars. Who can chain a planet? It's not me. One, that's not my skill set. Two, I mean, it's just not. Two, how are you even going to do it? And I just think, I like to think of myself as a dreamer. I like to think of myself as an ambitious person. But maybe it's just kind of, my loyalty or allegiance to honoring the natural world, but I just don't see it as an equation where I am greater than. And it's not even an equal to. I'm less than. Like if I didn't have hands, almost any animal in the wild could take me down. Like if a deer ran into me right now, what am I gonna do? Break every bone in my body, right? These are pretty large animals. Like if a tiny spider wanted to bite me and poison me, like what am I gonna do, right? And so I think it's like this idea of harnessing something like the sun but without the honor and reverence of what it is to us and for us. And like you said, you ended where I thought you might end, a weapon of war, a weapon of more control, a tool to oppress even more. And I just think a lot of the discoveries we're making currently, it's not about us. Like there's curiosity and then there's like God complex. And it seems like a lot of institutions, a lot of governments, a lot of people are sitting in this space where they feel like they are so much greater than the collective whole, that the individual I supersedes the collective we. And, I don't believe that to be true in life, in nature, in work, in play. And I think it's incredible that we can have these wonderful innovations. I do think harnessing the sun as a source of energy, I mean, we do it now, right? We've got solar panels, we've got like solar batteries, we've got all these things. We're in the
free.
process. Yay! But it just, I don't know, it's so disheartening because I'm like, are you all, I'm just like kind of like knock knock, who's home? Is anybody up here? Because we have a world that's suffering that actively needs our help right now in this moment. And yet we are yearning to leave this place and go to the stars and abandon our posts while we have fellow humans and non-humans who exist on this earth who could use with the same energy and conviction that we put towards other things, towards each other, towards the development of self. And, I see a lot of this as distraction. And you and I have also talked about this. It's like we call these pursuits high mindedness, we call it science. But if that high mindedness doesn't lead us back to one another, if it doesn't lead us back to the light and not in an effort to control and manipulate the light, it begs the question of what is the power of these divisions and how much greater would we be if we as a collective just joined together? Even in innovation, I think about this a lot of times when I do hear some of these ideas. Something that my parents used to say when I was growing up and that I've really come to believe is like the most brilliant person right now may be picking trash. The most brilliant person right now may not know how to read and write, but their mind is brilliant. They have a vision, a clear line of sight into innovation that, I won't name names, but those who think they are the most innovative amongst us would be envious of. But our measurements do not allow for them to excel. The most brilliant person could be a nonverbal autistic child It's like we have so many brilliant people on this planet, and I think every day wonderful ideas remain buried because we don't have a system to bring those people to the forefront to share their light. I'm curious what you think about that. As you're a technologist through and through in many, many ways. And you are also on social media a lot more than I am. And I'm just kind of curious, are you seeing what I would call everyday genius? Like, are you seeing people kind of rising up who are not your traditional academics, who are not your traditional technologists, who are coming to the forefront with really incredible ideas?
Yes, actually, there's a lot of activity amongst indigenous group. I think the story I saw that there was a group of indigenous folks who stormed some climate change conference in Brazil recently.
It was COP 30.
Yeah,
Yeah.
COP30. There we go.
And it was a caravan. They went through the Amazon and they took the same path as a famous colonizer. Let me see who it is. I don't want to make up names, but
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. So, that's a perfect example of where, I guess a protest has actually led to them being able to protect their land rights. And I'm seeing more and more stories of people with indigenous backgrounds who've made it in Western academia to try and bridge the gap between Western science and indigenous, healing medicine practices, etc. There's a good book that I got a while ago called Banana Leaves, I think. It was by a woman who's very much in this space of bridging. I see a lot of positive news actually around the world all the time. I feel like suffering has been there. It's been a part of our story for a long time, but I also do feel under the current that something is changing to give us an opportunity to stop obsessing over the suffering, if that makes sense. I'm not somebody who's gonna say forget all that has happened in the past because I'm one of those people where forgive but don't forget. It is important to remember the mistakes of the past, right? But there is some truth to sometimes when we focus so much on the suffering, we perpetuate it too, right? As part of the process. And so I think I noticed this strongest in exploring my own heritage, right? From the Pacific Islander side to Indian side to the stories of like when I was younger, actually, I was really into Gandhi and his life story, from South Africa back to India, etc. But then at the same time, I was also really into the story of Genghis Khan, Chinggis Khan from Mongolia. And I remember sharing this in an interview I think Adobe had with me once upon a time when I was in the creative field. But they had asked me about who are your inspirations, and I was like Gandhi, Leonardo da Vinci, and Genghis Khan. And the guy was like, whoa, those are three very different people. And how do you reconcile that? And I said, well, I can see how, for example, Chinggis united his people and context, right? During his time, everybody was at war. And he used war to also outlaw a lot of practices that we kind of take for granted now. And they there's this girl on Instagram. She's Mongol, and she talks a lot about Mongol history and Mongol culture, and she talked about how Mongol women had women's rights way before the West. They often think about like non-Western countries as being backwards, but Genghis Khan was really big on protecting women. It was the women who ruled the empires, who scaled the empires, who managed it, because the men knew that they were better at it, right? So it was a very interesting thing that I learned from Chinggis. And then Gandhi, you have like complete opposite, right? Non-violence to achieve the same outcome of unification. And then Leonardo da Vinci, I think the thread you might be seeing here is unification. Leonardo da Vinci had interest in a whole bunch of different fields, but he kind of threaded it all together through his own creations, his own works. And so those sort of things are what, like, I guess gives me inspiration, gives me hope when it comes to like the future. To be able to transcend our own suffering is what you see in Buddhism, many religions too, right? Do not forget, but also to be able to rise above the suffering. And again, with everything we've been talking about, I think that's where we are at right now, where there's something happening with time and our understanding of time, where we have an opportunity to like fold and kind of like neutralize the effects of the past, acknowledge, but also like see the shadow, work with it, use the energy that's currently present, and then let go to make way for whatever is coming next. And I am just seeing a lot of data points like pointing towards that. Yeah. So I think that's like my long-winded answer, right? To what you were talking about. And again, it's a separation, like going from division to unity, but the unity aspect, like I feel like we still have free will, free choice. And so that's why right now, everything that we are putting our attention towards is crystallizing the path forward. And when it comes to helping others, I think the best thing you can do, because there's problems all the time, right? And it's like just hard to like even fathom or try to tackle all these problems. But I think if you align with whatever it is your mission is in this lifetime, that's I think the best way you can contribute to whatever is happening on the planet right now. You know, living this like utmost alignment. Um,
I think that that is like the perfect way to wrap it up today, is to just kind of think of what unity is within us and around us. And there are so many examples of it. By the way, my friend, Mr. Khan, who's not a friend of mine because he doesn't know me. I mean, maybe he did, past life friend, maybe. But there's a book called The Secret. It's called The Secret History of
of the Mongol
Mongol
Queens.
Queens. Phenomenal. Fantastic. I have 2 copies of that book. It's so good.
Yeah.
I love that book. It's so transformative if you want to actually just hear about history, because history conflates the Khans, right? Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan. People don't always know the difference, but one it did what you were talking about, and one reaped mass destruction. So across the generational lines, you see how things can get distorted. Even when you unify, it can be twisted and become just this power grab. But I highly recommend that book. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, because it's a tremendous book. But I think as we kind of just go on into the next week, the next year, I think that that's a really hopeful way to leave us. I like to consider myself a realist, but I'm a hopeful, optimistic realist. And I think that, like Martin Luther King Jr. said, that the arc of the universe is towards the light, right? Like this idea that there is this moral arc, and it takes us up and to the right altogether. And I really do believe that. So, with that, we will leave the good people with these thoughts and with the term digital discernment, which I will be copywriting. I mean, I don't know if I actually will, but we can say we said it here first on this date in history. But anything you want to leave the folks with, George?
I think, yeah, at this point in time, maybe takeaway for today is think about what you are crystallizing in your life right now. Yeah, you know,
Mm-hmm.
if you knew that like the choices that you were making every single day right now was part of your crystallization process, consider what it is that you're crystallizing.
Beautiful. All right. Well, with that, bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.